My name is Sarah Collins, and for nearly 10 years, I poured myself into a company that most people had written off as a lost cause. When I first walked through those doors, the warehouses were a mess of misplaced inventory, suppliers were furious, shipments were always behind schedule, and the staff had simply stopped believing things could get better. I was a single mom trying to keep food on the table for my kids, so I took on the challenge without ever guessing it would swallow up years of my life. Bit by bit, through sheer persistence, I turned that chaos into a working system that the entire company came to rely on. For years, I showed up before the sun was even up and often didn't leave until long after everyone else had gone home. I learned every product line, every vendor relationship, every shipping schedule, and every costly error the business had ever made. I built tracking processes, reorganized the storage areas, and put procedures in place that cut mistakes dramatically. It was grueling work, but watching everything click into place made me proud because I knew it was helping hundreds of coworkers do their jobs well. As the months turned into years, the company earned a reputation for dependability instead of disorder. Suppliers who had once threatened to walk away started trusting us again. Customers got their shipments on schedule, and revenue climbed steadily. Most people figured the whole operation just ran itself because it looked so effortless, but they never witnessed the countless hours of work hidden behind that smooth surface. I never minded staying out of the spotlight because I trusted that solid work would eventually speak for itself. Then everything shifted when a new manager named Victor transferred in from another location. He came with fancy degrees, slick slideshows, and a vocabulary full of corporate jargon. In every meeting, he talked confidently about cutting costs and boosting efficiency, but he never once took the time to actually understand how the operation worked. He cared more about numbers that made him look good to upper management than about the people actually producing those results. At first, I tried to bring him up to speed. I walked him through our supplier relationships, our seasonal inventory shifts, and the systems holding everything together. He barely listened. Whenever I tried to explain something important, he brushed it off as overcomplicated. Eventually, it became clear he assumed anyone could step into my role, since all he ever saw were the finished results, never the years of work behind them. One Thursday morning, he called me into a cramped conference room and dropped the news that would change everything. Without any warm-up, he told me my position was being cut because the company found someone who would do the same work for far less pay. He even smiled, as though he expected me to nod along and thank him for it. After 9 years of dedication, that was the entire explanation I got. I sat there for a moment trying to absorb what had just happened. There had been no warnings, no conversations about performance, no acknowledgement of everything I'd put into that job. To him, I was simply a line item he could shrink. When I asked who would be taking over my work, he mentioned offhandedly that someone new would start the following week and suggested I jot down some notes before I left. Walking back to my desk felt like a dream. Coworkers carried on with their usual routines, while my entire career there was quietly ending. I pulled out notebooks packed with years of records and tried to condense critical processes, supplier contacts, scheduling details, and inventory steps into something usable. After hours of trying, I realized there was simply no way to squeeze almost a decade of knowledge into a few pages. By late afternoon, I was packing up my desk into a cardboard box, family photos, a mug my daughter had made for me, a handful of small keepsakes gathered over the years. Holding them, I realized just how much of my life had become wrapped up in that building. What stung the most wasn't losing the paycheck. It was realizing how little the company actually valued what I'd given them. Before heading out, I remembered I had a meeting scheduled later that day with Robert, a senior executive who oversaw several regions. Years before, we'd built a strong mutual respect after I helped him handle a tough situation with a young employee. Since then, he'd occasionally check in, talking through business issues or just life in general. I thought about reaching out to him, but decided to just go home first. Shortly after I got home, my phone started buzzing nonstop. When I finally picked up, it was Robert, asking why I hadn't shown up to an important quarterly review. Confused, I told him I'd been let go that morning. The silence on his end said everything. He had no idea this had happened. A few minutes later, HR called, asking about the circumstances of my termination, whether procedures had been followed, whether documentation existed. whether there had been any performance issues on record. My answers clearly raised red flags, because none of that had actually taken place. It left me wondering if Victor had acted entirely on his own, without running it past anyone above him. That night, Victor called again, but he sounded nothing like the confident manager from that morning. His voice was strained and anxious as he claimed there'd been some kind of mix-up and asked me to come back right away. Suddenly, I wasn't an unnecessary cost anymore. I was suddenly indispensable, urgently needed to put together reports nobody else knew how to produce. I listened as he scrambled to justify himself and convince me to return, dangling promises of a raise, better benefits, more recognition. Funny how none of those things existed until the moment I was gone. For years, my work had gone unnoticed, yet within a single day, it had become irreplaceable. By the next morning, problems were popping up everywhere. Employees were calling, unsure where critical stock was kept. Suppliers needed answers no one else could give. Managers were struggling with systems they'd never bothered to learn. Things that felt second nature to me turned out to be a complete mystery to everyone else, simply because nobody had ever taken the time to learn them. The person hired to replace me quit after only a few hours. The role had been pitched as basic admin work, but reality told a different story fast. What looked simple from the outside actually demanded years of hands-on experience and quick problem-solving. The gap between what people assumed and what was actually true became impossible to hide. Over the next several weeks, things spiraled, deliveries fell behind, inventory got jumbled, supplier relationships frayed, and errors piled up. Every new problem exposed another piece of knowledge that had only ever existed in my head and my daily judgment calls. The system hadn't been running itself like everyone assumed. It had been running because someone was constantly keeping it alive. Meanwhile, I put my energy into finding something new. Instead of stewing in bitterness, I polished my resume, reached out to old contacts, and looked into companies that actually valued operational know-how. Eventually, a growing manufacturing company offered me a role helping restructure their distribution network and tighten up efficiency. From day one there, the contrast was night and day. The owner personally walked me around, introduced me to the team, explained the company's goals, and asked what I needed to succeed. Instead of expecting overnight miracles, she understood real improvement takes time and effort. For the first time in years, I actually felt valued. The new role came with its own set of challenges, but they were ones I recognized: messy inventory, scattered supplier communication, reporting systems that needed real work. Drawing on everything I'd learned over the years, I started building structure and accountability from the ground up. Progress came steadily, and the team embraced the changes quickly. As trust built, suppliers took notice too. Several longtime partners who'd worked with me before reached out wanting to deepen their relationship with my new employer. They cared more about consistency and professionalism than flashy branding, and many shifted a significant chunk of their business to where they knew they'd be taken care of. Months later, I heard that my old employer was still struggling to recover from the fallout. The new management team worked hard to stabilize things, but rebuilding lost trust, and years of institutional knowledge wasn't easy. You can't replace a decade of relationships and experience with a cheaper hire or a new spreadsheet. At home, my kids noticed the change in me before I even did. They told me I seemed happier, calmer, more present. Looking back, I realized just how much energy I'd wasted trying to prove my worth to people who'd already decided not to see it. Letting go of that weight felt like a relief I hadn't expected. As the new company grew, I was promoted to oversee multiple locations and train the next generation of leaders. One of the most rewarding parts of that role became mentoring young employees eager to learn. Instead of hoarding what I knew, I passed it all along because strong companies thrive by building up their people, not leaning on just one person to hold everything together. Over time, former coworkers started reaching out to share their own stories. Many admitted that watching what happened to me changed how they viewed the company entirely. Seeing someone hardworking and dedicated get tossed aside so easily made them rethink what loyalty was actually worth. A number of them eventually moved on and found better opportunities elsewhere. One conversation in particular has stuck with me ever since. A former coworker thanked me for helping him years earlier after he'd made an expensive mistake. He told me that my choice to support him instead of blaming him had shaped how he treated people for the rest of his career. Hearing that reminded me that real leadership has nothing to do with titles or authority. It's about the mark we leave on the people around us every day. Looking back, getting feared felt crushing in the moment. But it turned out to be one of the best things that ever happened to me. It pushed me toward a healthier environment, opened doors I never would have found otherwise, and proved that your true worth was never up to one manager's opinion. Sometimes closing one chapter is just the start of a far better story. Thanks so much for sticking with us through this whole journey. If this story moved you and you want more powerful, real-life inspired stories about resilience, success, and karma, hit subscribe and share our channel with others. We make these videos for you, and your support is what keeps these stories coming.